Okay, anybody remember what we went over last week? John, yeah. More specifically, please. John chapter 19, right? The end of 19. And we were quick going over what we went over because it was remembrance service. We went over the breaking of the legs, and we talked about the swoon theory. What was the swoon theory? Hogwash. Yes, it was. But what was the swoon theory?
That Jesus didn't die, he just passed out on the cross.
Right, that Jesus survived the crucifixion, and that he didn't really come back from the dead. He just was revived, and then was able to show up for a little while. There's all sorts of crazy theories and stories related to the swoon theory. What is Dan Brown's book? The Da Vinci Code. Yeah, it's related to the swoon theory, right? Where Jesus actually goes and has kids and such. And there's a Holy Blood, Holy Grail book that came out a long time ago. I remember my grandfather had it, and it was all about all the monarchs of Europe were all directly genetically related to Jesus Christ. How do you like that? That's some interesting stuff. So, anyways, so there was the swoon theory, but there was also the replacement or twin theory. What was that one? He had a twin brother. No, not exactly. That he was replaced by somebody else was crucified on the cross. It was either Judas or Simon of Cyrene or some unknown person, right? That somebody else replaced Jesus on the cross and died on the cross, and that Jesus never actually suffered. And we talked about in Islam, there's, I can't remember the guy's name now, I have it written down somewhere. He's a Muslim apologist, and he actually is a proponent of this twin or substitution theory where Judas actually, he proposes that Judas took Jesus' place. Because in Islamic theology, God doesn't allow good men to suffer, right? And so it would have been impossible for Allah to allow Jesus, who is a prophet in Islam, to suffer on the cross and die. So we went over those theories quickly. And I don't know if we got to the point where we were talking about the breaking of the legs and how Jesus' legs were not broken, right? That he was, when the order came through because of the Jewish request that the bodies not remain on the cross during the Sabbath, that they were going to break all the legs of all of those who were crucified, and they went around to break the legs, and they broke both of the thieves' legs, but when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead, right? And so they did not break his legs, but they took a spear and drove it up under his rib cage, and water and blood flowed out, as John records. And John records it and says, he who testifies, meaning in John's language in his gospel, meaning John witnessed this and is testifying in his own gospel that he saw the piercing and the water and the blood flow out. The thing that we might dwell on here is that this also was a fulfillment of God's sovereignty over the entire situation, right? These Roman soldiers who had been given the order to break the legs violated the orders and chose not to break the legs of Jesus. They chose instead to drive a spear up. Now, we talked about the fact that they are professional executioners, and they have lots of experience and would have recognized that Jesus was in fact already dead, but because they are responsible, and we talked about that, they're responsible for the death of the prisoners, they drove the spear up to make absolutely sure, right, that there was not going to be any swoon theory, right? So they kill, they make sure that Jesus is dead. He's already dead, but they drive the spear up, and this is all part of the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies that they will look on him who they have pierced. And so you see that the decision of the soldiers to not break the legs of Jesus is under the sovereign control of Almighty God. It is not an accident. It is not just a coincidence. It is God purposefully controlling the situation that is taking place by directing the choices of the soldiers to not break his legs, and not simply to not break his legs, but to spear him in his side. Right? So, this week we're going to go on and look at the burial and the resurrection. And we're going to read from John 19:38, and we're going to read down to John chapter 20, verse 10. So, after these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one, for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had been laid. Therefore, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark, and saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. So she ran and came to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So Peter and the other disciple went forth, and they were going to the tomb. The two were running together, and the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter, and came to the tomb first, and stooping and looking in, he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. And so Peter also came, following him, and entered the tomb, and he saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth which had been on his head not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. So the other disciple who had first come to the tomb then also entered, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scriptures, that he must rise again from the dead. So the disciples went away again to their own homes. Okay, so it says, after these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. So Christ's death at this point is on a divine timetable. And it's a very strict timetable with regards to the events that are taking place at the crucifixion. So Jesus chose to die at this absolutely precise time because it was necessary that he die early enough for Joseph and Nicodemus to have time before the Sabbath to prepare his body for burial and to bury it. It was necessary for Jesus to be in the tomb for the 3 days, right? Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. He had to be in the tomb, but also he had to be prepared beforehand so that Joseph and Nicodemus would not violate the Sabbath in order to put him in the tomb. Right? Because it was so close to the Sabbath that they had to have time to prepare the body, and that was not a simple act. This was a difficult. They had to get permission to take the body. They had to take the body down, and they had to transport it to the tomb. It had to be wrapped in linen with the spices, and so all of that is going to take time. They have to lay it in there, and then they have to put the stone and roll it in front of the entrance. All of that takes time. And so in order for that to take place and them not violate the Sabbath, Jesus has to die at a precise time to allow enough time for that to take place. Now, Joseph of Arimathea is obviously a witness to Christ's death, right? Because he has to be there to know that Christ is already dead in order for him to go and request the body of Pilate. So we know from the synoptics that when he does go to request the body of Pilate, Pilate is amazed that Jesus is already dead. And so he summons the centurion to come and bear witness of the fact that Jesus is already dead. And then he gives, after he has confirmed the death of Jesus, he gives the body of Jesus to Joseph of Arimathea. Now, not anybody could go and request Jesus' body. Obviously, Jesus is a high profile and very controversial figure. So Joseph has been selected by God for this. And we'll get into that a little bit more later on. But Joseph is a prominent member of the Sanhedrin. So he is a person who has authority to go, right, and ask for the body. He is not just some Joe. He is not one of the apostles or one of the disciples of Jesus that is well known. He is in secret, and he goes to Pilate and asks for the body, and Pilate delivers it into his hands. We're told in the synoptics that Joseph is a good guy, right? He is a righteous man who is looking forward to the coming of the kingdom of God, and he had not consented to the death sentence handed down to Jesus. Now, we don't know how he got around that, whether he had just chosen to be absent from the council at that time, or whether he was one of the, by requirements of the law, dissenters, because in the Jewish law, a unanimous decision for the death penalty was frowned upon, and it was generally only acceptable if there was at least one dissenter, right? But we don't know exactly all that went through, how that went through. But Joseph of Arimathea had not given consent to the death penalty, right? John the apostle doesn't really have a high view of those who were followers of Christ in secret, right? We see in John 12:42-43, he says, "Nevertheless, many even of the rulers believed in him because of the Pharisees, they were not confessing him for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the approval of men rather than the approval of God." But Joseph of Arimathea mans up at this time. He is praised for his boldness in overcoming his fears and taking an incredible risk in going and requesting the body of Jesus. Because he obviously knows that this is no longer going to be secret, right? He is no longer going to be able to hide his discipleship. He is going to go and request the body, and he's going to place it in his own tomb, right? And everybody is going to know that he has done this and shown this rebel, this traitor to the people. He is going to show him honor by putting him in his own tomb. And so we see that Joseph is taking that step. And one of the things that we should think about in this is that here is Joseph and Nicodemus, right? And they're both political figures. They're both prominent political figures, and they are disciples of Jesus Christ, right? And we think about today in our own society, and we think about people who profess Jesus Christ that are Christians within the political sphere, and power, politics, and piety are difficult balls to juggle. Especially here, like in olden times, where often your political power was just by birth, right? Where you were just born into your political power, and it was pretty hard to take it away from you. In our society, with a democracy, your power and your politics are related to your popularity, right? That's how it works. That's how it works in a democracy. So if you offend the powers that be, you'll lose your power and your position. That's just how it works in our society. And so you think maybe in the States right now it might be easy to be a Christian and an open Christian, but think about Quebec, right? If you're an open professor of Jesus Christ in Quebec right now and you're in the government, how would that go for you? Probably not very well, because of their emphasis on secularism, right? A huge emphasis on secularism. And so you can't wear a religious symbol, you can't make public profession, and so in Quebec right now, it is very detrimental to your political career to be an open professor of Jesus Christ. And so it takes wisdom and discretion to be an open Christian in a place like Quebec. And there's all sorts of places around the world that is exactly the situation, that we see this kind of difficulty that both Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus both have to deal with at this time. That they have to be very judicial in how they act around their fellow politicians. Another thing that is interesting is that this very act that Joseph and Nicodemus take by getting the body of Jesus and by preparing it for burial and by putting it in the tomb, there's a good chance that this is what is the impetus for the other council members to go and ask on the Sabbath. They approach Pilate and they ask him for a guard and a seal on the tomb, right? Because they've already experienced that some of the other council members have gone and shown honor to Jesus by putting him in that tomb. So this might in fact be why they're concerned that there's going to be meddling by disciples and perhaps even secret disciples of Jesus. And so that could be the reason why they go and get Pilate on the Sabbath. And I emphasize that because the Sabbath plays heavily into all of what's going on right here, right? The timing and everything is all about the Sabbath at this point. And so they go to Pilate and ask on the Sabbath if he'll give a guard and a seal. Okay, so Joseph's tomb being close by and a nice one, it's brand new, it makes it a logical choice for someone who needs to get Jesus buried quickly before the Sabbath, but still wants to show proper respect and honor. And coincidentally, it is, of course, a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. The tomb is new, and it's close by, and it belongs to Joseph of Arimathea, and all these things play into Isaiah 53:9. His grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death. So, not only was he crucified with criminals, but he was also put in the tomb of the rich man, right? And so a fulfillment of Isaiah 53. So we see that Joseph's choice to follow Jesus, his discipleship of Jesus, his wealth, his position on the council, his manning up to request Jesus' body, his decision to have a tomb carved out for himself, its location, his choice of its location, and his decision to place Jesus' corpse in that tomb, all were variables that were sovereignly controlled. Right? None of this was random. This was all selected by God. All the choices in Joseph of Arimathea's life up until this point, and including this point, were all orchestrated for God for this purpose. None of it was random. Right? God's control, God's sovereignty is over every variable in every point in creation at all time. There is nothing that happens that isn't preordained and actively controlled by God. So that when Joseph decided to put Jesus in his own tomb, when Joseph decided to have a tomb cut, Joseph was not thinking, gee, I should get a tomb made and I should get it cut out for this reason so that I can put Jesus in it because he's going to be crucified. He wasn't thinking that he should follow Jesus because he's going to need to put him in his own tomb, right? None of that is in Joseph's mind. Joseph is simply acting in the way that he thinks is best. He's simply acting in accordance with his own will. This is what he wants to do. Right? But all of the things that he wants to do is all controlled by Almighty God. That is how sovereignty works. No violence to the will of the creature, but every creature acting in accordance with the sovereign will of God. Okay. So, the other thing is, this is Joseph's tomb. The other thing is that the construction of the tomb, this will play in later on, the construction of the tomb is interesting because there is a typical construction of the majority of the tombs that are constructed have holes in them and you slide the body in, right? But this tomb was not constructed in this way. This tomb was constructed so that the body was laid out and there was a place at the foot and a place at the head. And so when you looked in the tomb, you could see the body laid out, right? That was not a usual construction, not unheard of, but not the most common construction. Okay, so Joseph of Arimathea provides the linen and the tomb, and Nicodemus provides the spices, which would have been incredibly expensive also, right? Myrrh and aloes, they would have been pricey, so both of them have invested into this undertaking. And one of the things to remember here is that what they do indicates what they expect. What do they expect in regards to this body? It's going to stink. It's going to rot, right? They are not looking for a resurrection here. They don't take the time to wrap up this body in linen and spices because they think Jesus is going to come back to life. They take time to wrap up this body in linen and spices and put it in the tomb and roll a huge stone over because they expect Jesus' body to rot. There is no expectation of a resurrection here. They obviously love Jesus. They obviously are disciples of his teaching. But they do not expect him to come back from the dead. And it's that simple. Okay, so we move on to, now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb. So there's lots of questions here. about who, what, when, and why. So in Luke 23:54-56, it says, "It was the preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. Now the women who had come with him out of Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid, and then they returned and prepared spices and perfume. On the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment." So the women who had followed him, right, actively followed and saw where Jesus was laid. I think this is kind of funny because it's a very typical gender kind of stereotype here, right? The women watch Joseph and Nicodemus take care of the body, and then they go back and prepare spices so they can do the job right, right? Right? They watch the guys do it, and yeah, okay, good for you. And then they're going to come on the Monday or on the Sunday and come and fix it up because it's the guys, right? So on the first day of the week, they come out. Now the question is one, John never mentions the other women. He only mentions Mary Magdalene. It's the only woman that he mentions. All the synoptics talk about the women going to the tomb, but John doesn't. Why do you suppose that is?
She's the one who went and told them. So.
What's that?
She's the one who went and told them, so.
But yeah, she's the one that went and told, and I'll get into that, John and Peter. She's the one that goes and talks to John and Peter. But John is writing, and we talked about this before, John is writing with the understanding of what? You already know the synoptics. You already know that the women went early. So John is focusing in, right, on Mary Magdalene for a very particular reason, and he fleshes that out. Yes?
Is it because she encounters the Lord, like in the morning, like she sees him? She thinks he's a gardener, and then is that part of that passage?
Yeah, that's all part of the explanation of why John is particularly laser focused on Mary Magdalene, right? The women go to the tomb, and among the women is Mary Magdalene, and she goes to the tomb while it's still dark. Now, anybody who goes hunting understands that dawn is a fuzzy concept, right? Yeah. Right? There's a legal definition of when you can shoot your deer, right, Coleman? Yes, so. Right? It's not instantaneous. Dawn is not instantaneous. So one of the things we have to remember here is that these women are devout Jews. They are devout Jews, and they have to carry spices and ointment to the tomb. And so they cannot do that on the Sabbath. That would be a violation of the Sabbath. And so they can't do that. So whenever they come to the tomb, it has to be on Sunday morning. It can't be still on Saturday. Because if it's on Saturday, according to Jewish reckoning, they have violated the commandment. As we saw, they rested according to the commandment. So, the fact that it's still dark, what does that mean, still dark? Well, the answer is that it's obviously light enough to be considered Sunday morning, the new day, but it's still pretty dark out, right? So it's still dawn, so it's not night, it's dawn, but it's still pretty dark. So they have been watching, and no doubt these women have not got a lot of sleep. You got to understand, you got to think about the intensity of the emotions that are going on with these people. And they are intensely sorrowful and intensely invested in this whole situation. And so they have been waiting. They went home on the Friday, and started preparing for the Sunday. And they are incredibly, intensely anticipating the arrival of Sunday morning so that they can get right to the tomb and start their work. That's where they are. And so at the first available moment on Sunday, boom, they're gone. They're off to the tomb, and they are going to do the work. And they're fretting all the way about what they're going to do about the stone. Right? So we see that they're still dark, and they go to the tomb, and John only records Mary Magdalene. And what is her response? And when does it occur? Yes?
She wept. I've often thought that she is included in the John account. Well, when somebody comes to the Lord, there are times when we've gone through a whole lot more than other folks too. Mm-hmm. And Mary had gone through a lot. And for this encounter, like Mary, when Jesus, at the end there, verse 16, he just says Mary.
Yeah.
It's very, very compassionate too. I don't know how close she would have been to the other women or whatever, but like rising in the morning and the grief. And if her Savior hadn't risen, then her freeing from that past life would have been meaningless.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to put that much theological thought processes to Mary. Obviously, what is most intense for her right now is that the person that she loves, who had forgiven her, is dead. That's the intensity of her emotion, is that the person, her teacher, her master, is dead, and she's upset. And there's no indication that she's thinking about resurrection here. None. Zero. Nada. She is not thinking about resurrection. She is thinking that he is dead in the tomb. Now, there is some hypothesis that she goes ahead of everybody alone first, and I really don't get that impression. I just get the impression from John that he is just focused in on her. And I think what you see here is that Mary comes to the tomb early with the other women, and as soon as she sees, and seeing the stone already taken from the tomb, so she ran. Right? And I think what you're seeing here is Mary comes to the tomb with everybody else, with all the other women. She gets to the tomb, sees the stone rolled away, and she loses it. Right? She is hanging by a thread emotionally, and when she sees that stone rolled away, she is gone. And she goes to John and Peter, and the reason why I think she goes to John and Peter is because those two disciples are the ones that are closest. John is right there at the cross with the women. Right? He is right there with the women. And so they are close to the women. Both Peter and John are close to the women. And it is quite possible that they were there over the Sabbath with them. And so she knows exactly where John and Peter are. And she goes, boom, right to them. She goes running back to them. And the words she says don't have any reflection that she has encountered any angels or anything. Right? What she says is this: they have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've laid him. Right? She didn't say anything about we saw angels, nothing. She just goes to them and boom! They've taken him. He's gone. I don't know where he is. Right? And so we see that she has not gone into an explanation of anything that is recorded about the encounter of the other women with the angels and going into the tomb and seeing. She has just according to John, she saw the stone taken away, and she runs off to Peter and John. Right? We'll flesh that out a little bit more next week. Okay.